On September 17th, 2023, Saudi Arabia announced that it was discontinuing its normalization talks with Israel, supposedly due to the Palestinian issue, and in this video I will prove that the Biden administration and Barack Obama were behind this and coerced Saudi Arabia into this. And this will be proven to be the truth after the prediction that on December 2nd, 2023, a dirty bomb or a suitcase nuke will explode in New York City and cause a mass evacuation. The date that this video was posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. In this video, I will also explain how this big picture of signs that God has demonstrated will also prove this, and this will include the prophetic visitation of thousands of Jews to Joseph's tomb for the first time in over a year since it had been vandalized on May 17, 2023. And this will include the prophetic comet E3 that connects to the death of Ken Starr, who is known for investigating the 42nd president. And in Bible prophecy, the number 42 is synonymous with the Antichrist. And this big picture of signs prophecy will also include the lost Argentine submarine with 44 sailors, as in the 44th president, the apocalyptic evacuation in the Paradise Fire, and Trump, God's trumpet, and his visit to Paradise, California, and the false missile alert in Hawaii in January of 2018, and the 44 million people that lost power in the Argentina blackout in 2019 on Pentecost, which means 50th day, followed 50 days later by the blackout in Jakarta, Indonesia, where the 44th president grew up for 4 years, and this was on the birthday of the 44th president, and there were 4 deaths. And among many other things, this will include the real-life Atlantis, Port Royal, Jamaica, at the time the busiest economic port in the Americas, that sank under the ocean due to an earthquake, killing 2,000 people. And I will explain how this was a judgment warning from God that is in fact connecting to the big judgment of the dirty bomb or suitcase nuke explosion predicted to be on September 25th, 2023. This very important video explains part of God's big picture of prophetic signs, patterns, and connections, and an important story God told that pointed to September 25th, 2023, regarding the prediction for an explosion of a dirty bomb or suitcase nuke in Manhattan, New York City, and mass evacuation from Manhattan Island on December 2nd, 2023. September 25th ended up being the penultimate step in the trail of signs leading to December 2nd. For a full explanation of the very important prophetic signs that occurred on September 25th, including the 67th Annual International Atomic Energy Agency Conference that revealed adding 67 days to September 25th to reach December 2nd, the predicted date for the dirty bomb or suitcase nuke explosion in Manhattan, watch the amazing video titled Bomb in New York City on 12/2, December 2nd, equals 343 firefighters lost on 9/11 prophecy. Alright, this video is making the prediction that on September 25th, 2023, a dirty bomb or a suitcase nuke will be detonated in New York City, and there will be a mass evacuation from New York City. This date, September 25th, 2023, is 4 plus 4 days after September 17th, 2023, which at the time of this recording was yesterday. Today is September 18th. There was a very important prophetic sign that occurred yesterday on September 17th, And I will explain this and why it is important and how it connects to the big picture, as I will explain in this truly profound diagram. And the news that happened, the prophetic sign that happened yesterday, was the news that Saudi Arabia, the news through the U.S., a statement officially came through the U.S. from Saudi Arabia, saying that Saudi Arabia was officially ending the talks to normalization with Israel. For a couple of years now, a few years, the Arab world has been normalizing relations with Israel, and the Palestinian issue, the so-called Palestinian issue, was no longer an issue, or no longer an obstacle to peace between Israel and the Arab world. And what I will prove, and that is the purpose of this prediction that is from God, it is the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction, is to prove what I am saying. And make no mistake, there is no purpose for the prediction unless it is to prove this controversial thing that I am saying in this video. And I am saying that the left, led by Barack Obama, absolutely hated this. They couldn't stand it. And the truth is coming out now. And what I am saying is that what is behind this move by Saudi Arabia, arguably the leader of the Arab world, to discontinue the process to normalization between Israel and the Arab world, was in fact instigated, caused by, induced by not only Barack Obama, but also in general the left. And I'm talking about we'll just call it the left. Now, there are a lot of people that are confused on the left, such as the nature of the left in general. And some are more radical than others. And some are more radically left than others, if you want to use an adjective, leftism. But leftism is politics of power. Everything is about power in the politics of leftism. And it is rooted in Marxism, and there is no such thing as moderate left, because all it is incrementally, if you will, a moderate left is simply smaller increments towards the ultimate goal, which is communism and Marxism. And all the various forms of the left politics today are all rooted in Marxism, which is in fact actually rooted in Rousseau. But this is too much for this video, to get off into too much of a philosophical rabbit trail here. What I am saying is that Barack Obama, the Antichrist, who isn't just by himself, he is a man of the left, and the left loves him, and he is the representative of the spirit of Antichrist. And the Israel-Arab or Palestinian conflict cannot be properly understood without a spiritual context. And it in fact goes all the way back to the Bible and Ishmael and Isaac. But that too is another story. But what I wish to prove with this video and this prediction is that it was Barack Obama that coerced Saudi Arabia into making this official statement. And I'll just read from the Jerusalem Post article regarding this, and then I'll just elaborate a little bit more and then prove everything with the diagram and then the prediction. All right, the date is September 17th. This is the date of this news story. And I'll explain why that's prophetic as well, this particular date. For one thing, as I mentioned, though, it is 4 + 4 days, which hints at the 44th president, before it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan and the nation's walls of security collapse. Okay, the Jerusalem Post, Saudi Arabia suspends talks on peace deal with Israel Arab report claims. Riyadh withdrew from normalization talks due to Benjamin Netanyahu's quote-unquote extremist government, as per the unconfirmed Elaf report. This is all propaganda. And Jerusalem Post isn't really a leftist paper. It's just quoting the propaganda because that's the news. In other words, what I'm saying is this isn't at all the reason for Saudi Arabia discontinuing normalization, the talks of normalizing ties with Israel. It isn't anything at all to do with Benjamin Netanyahu or the supposed extremist government. That's the opinion of the left that view him as an extremist. Of course, he isn't. They are the extremists. Saudi Arabia informed the Biden administration of its decision to halt all talks of normalizing ties with Israel on Sunday. Okay, so this is a report, but the information comes through the Biden administration. See, Saudi Arabia informed the Biden administration on Sunday, September 17th. The Arab news outlet Elaf cited an Israeli official in the Prime Minister's office as saying, okay, so the news comes from the Prime Minister's office, Benjamin Netanyahu's office, but he got the news from the U.S., which is supposedly the middleman in this development between Saudi Arabia and Israel, but in fact it is behind it. According to the unconfirmed report, Riyadh issued a message through the U.S., like I'm saying, explaining that the quote-unquote extremist nature of Israel's right-wing government, that's the view of Obama and the leftists, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is quote-unquote torpedoing any possibility of rapprochement with the Palestinians and thus with the Saudis, as per Elaf. This is complete nonsense, and everyone who knows anything knows that it is. This is purely ideological from the left government of America. That's what this is. This is purely ideological. Saudi Arabia isn't any longer ideological like this regarding the Palestinian issue. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been in the normalization talks to begin with, which have been ongoing for a while now. And that's rational. It is rational for them to have these normalization talks. And the Palestinian issue, the Arabs, in the large part, also understand that it is nonsense. And the Palestinians are ruled by the factions that are irrational and full of hate, and the normal everyday mainstream Arab knows this as well. Furthermore, the report specified that Saudi Arabia was put off from potential peace from a potential peace deal due to Netanyahu's quote-unquote acceptance of demands made by the likes of the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, who the Saudis see as quote-unquote extreme right. In other words, the Biden administration, the Obama administration sees as quote-unquote extreme right. Okay, here's some more proof of what I'm saying. Anthony Blinken, Palestinian issue is critical for peace deal. Last week, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, a leftist, a Marxist, said that, and that's true, by the way. I'm not talking from some sort of right-wing conspiratorial perspective here. The true conspiracy is that these people that rise to the top of these government departments are Marxists. That's anyway. Okay, so as the Saudi Arabia informed the Biden, last week, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said that Saudi Arabia informed the Biden administration that resolving Palestinian issues is critical for any normalization deal with Israel. Well, this is out of the blue. Why now is this coming to light? It's because the left, Obama and the leftists hate this. They are pro-Palestinian. They do not want peace. Well, they claim to want peace, but the truth is, spiritually, they are in rebellion against God, and they do not want peace, and they are using the Palestinians as a pawn. Let me just finish before elaborating on that. It is also clear that from what we hear from the Saudis, that if this process is to move forward, the Palestinian peace is going to be very important too. Blinken said on Wednesday in an interview in the podcast Pod Save the World, which is blasphemy right there in itself. Pod Save the World. Only God can save the world. Anyway, this is propaganda. This was propaganda put out in advance of this coming statement. That's why Anthony Blinken was on this podcast saying what he said. He is orchestrating these things behind the scenes, and he put out this propaganda as a heads up to what's coming. Israeli normalization with the Arab world and, quote, any of the efforts that are going to improve relations between Israel and its neighbors cannot be a substitute for Israel and the Palestinians resolving their differences and having a much better future for Palestinians, Blinken said. Now, he didn't say that on behalf of the Saudi Arabians. He said that, or the Saudi government. He said that as if it was his own opinion. That's why it was said so eloquently and beautifully, and these are his own thoughts. These are how they think. And they are livid that there would be any sort of normalization with the Arab world without resolving, so-called resolving the Palestinian issue. That's the true agenda here, and they are putting in their mind things back on track by putting the focus back on the Palestinian issue and halting the normalization with the Arab world between Israel and the Arab world, because that's just not allowed to happen for leftists with leaving the Palestinian issue behind. So they're bringing back the Palestinian issue. Okay, in our judgment. Okay, so quote, in our judgment, he's talking about him. In our judgment, that needs to involve a two-state solution, unquote, which is the biggest transgression against God and his plan as described in Bible prophecy, for which the world will be judged and destroyed. And what I am saying is that because America was behind this and the ending of the normalization between Israel and the Arab world, America will now be judged 4 + 4 days later with the predicted suitcase dirty bomb. That's exactly what will happen here. And what I am saying is that when that happens, it will prove what I am saying is that it is judgment from God for doing the actions that it has been doing here behind the scenes and bringing this so-called Palestinian conflict back into the forefront and ending the peace process between Israel and its neighbors, which is evil, because the left is evil, period. All right, some points of truth regarding the so-called Palestinian conflict. First of all, Yasser Arafat, the symbolic leader of the so-called Palestinian movement, was born in Cairo, Egypt. The land was largely uninhabited before Jews started emigrating back to Israel and turning the land into an agricultural economy. Before that, it was marshland and desert, ruled by absentee landlords in the Ottoman Empire. And the land was bought up by Jews and then turned into the agricultural economy. And because it was the most successful or very successful compared to its neighbors, it attracted Arab immigrants. And the Arab population began to grow as they came to provide labor in the new developing economy. Of course, Arabs and Muslims have 10 to 15 children each. And so their population grew much quicker than the Jewish population. But that's not to say that they outnumbered the Jews, because there were many Jews that were immigrating back. The families grew rather quickly compared to Jewish families, is what I'm saying. And this myth of the Palestinian refugees is a result of the Arabs in the beginning, years ago, refusing peace. There was a plan put forth in 1947 by the UN to make Israel a two-state nation. And at that time, the plan consisted of a fraction of land for Israel that it has today. The Jews at that time were, in fact, happy to have the offer, and in exchange for recognition of a legitimate Jewish state. But they were given a sliver of land on the Mediterranean that included Tel Aviv and not much else. It wasn't nearly what it is today, the geography. But God is in control. And through the Arabs attacking Israel, Israel expanded its territory out of necessity, which includes the beginning of the Palestinian supposed refugee crisis. Because at one point in the Israel-Arab War in 1949, the Arabs told the Palestinians to vacate the area because they were coming in and they were going to just annihilate the Jews. So the Palestinians vacated, and this is an example of a demonstration of God's hand, because there's no rational reason for why the Jews were able to successfully defend themselves and win that war. They were cornered and outnumbered, and they should have lost that. But miraculously, and it's just one of many miraculous examples of how militarily they defeated the Arabs throughout the decades. And this began this displacement of Arabs into where they are today, which is these areas of Israel. Not all of them, because 20% of Israel is still Arab. But a lot of them left, and they left voluntarily out of hatred. Because when they were offered the partition plan in 1947, the Arabs refused it and preferred war. And even though they got way more than they would have ever gotten now, and furthermore, like I'm saying, they wouldn't have been there in the first place had it not been for the Jewish development. But furthermore, also, they left out of hatred. They refused the peace deal because of hatred. And where does this hatred, where is it rooted? It's rooted in Islam. Islam is not allowed to accept Jews. It's part of their religion. And their religion means something to them. So there was never going to be peace as long as there is Islam. And what is Islam rooted in? Satan. Muhammad himself said in the Islamic holy book, in the Hadith, and if you want to think I'm propagating hate here, I'm sorry, look it up. It's in their own book. It's in their own book, and they won't even argue it. But in the Hadith, Muhammad first thought that he, after his encounter with supposedly the Archangel Gabriel in the cave, he thought that he was demon-possessed, and he tried to kill himself twice by throwing himself off a mountain. But it was his wife and his friends that said, no, you aren't demon-possessed, you are a prophet. And that's how it all began. But at first, he thought he was demon-possessed, and that's because he was. Anyway, when you look at and understand Islam correctly, it's clearly designed by Satan to counter Christianity, because the religion is obsessed with how Jesus is just a prophet. And the whole religion is centered around how God cannot have a son and Jesus is just a prophet. That is the Islamic religion in a nutshell. it's clearly designed to counter Christianity. So, and I could go on that too. So we want to limit things here. What I'm saying is that there is no reason for this Palestinian conflict, because the rational thing to do also, once the Arabs were displaced, would have been to incorporate them into the neighboring countries, such as Jordan and Syria and Saudi Arabia. If these poor Palestinians that they claim to care for, which they don't, if they were sincere about their well-being, these Palestinians and them being supposedly holed up in this these places that are responsible for their poverty because the land isn't what it should be, and there's too many of them in a small space, or whatever the case, which both aren't true either. But if they claim what I just said, but if they truly claimed to care for these Palestinians and their well-being, it would actually be in their interest also to increase their population. So the question is, why don't these Palestinians get absorbed into the neighboring Arab countries, which is where they came from originally anyway? The truth is they're used as a pawn. They're being used as a pawn for their hatred against Jews. And that is rooted in Satan. The truth is the conflict cannot be properly understood without a spiritual perspective, like I said at the beginning. Only a spiritual perspective can explain the use of Palestinians as a pawn by the Arab neighbors. In other words, the hatred of Jews throughout the centuries is a unique one. Unlike other hatreds for other people between rival tribes, only hatred for the Jews has caused the hater to do things that would ultimately hurt them. But if they can hurt the Jews, even if it hurts them, they'll do it. And that's irrational. That's a different kind of hatred that the world does not know of, except when it comes to Jews. And that's the case when it comes to Islam and the hatred for Jews. Because like I'm saying, it's in their book to hate, it's in their holy book to hate Jews and to not accept them in their midst. That's in their book. So that explains the conflict. Okay, because otherwise it's irrational. And now that the Arabs had mellowed out and begun to realize that, at least the mainstream Arabs, why it's and also realizing rationally that it's to our advantage to befriend Israel and and normalize ties because of a common enemy, which is Shiite Islam. The Sunni Muslims are in a civil war with the Shiite Muslims in Iran. And so they have a common enemy, and that's another reason for normalizing ties with Israel. So, in other words, rationality had begun to prevail. But it's, as with the development on this September 17th date, it's been reversed, and officially, and the Palestinian conflict and the two-state solution, etc., the transgression against God in the Bible, has been put back onto the forefront. And who is behind it? In other words, who is more interested in using the Palestinians as a pawn than the Arab world right now? America. The leftists in America. Barack Obama. It is astounding, which therefore makes America the evil one in the world, against God's plan, against God's people, against God's land. All along, America had been the greatest ally of Israel and the friend of Israel. And America was the first nation to recognize Israel as a state when it declared its independence in 1948. But things have come a long way since then, and the left, and with the help of leftist Jews in America, ironically, have made America now the greatest evil when it comes to this Palestinian conflict, which is the big issue of the end of history. The issue of the Middle East conflict. And so, I hope I explained that well enough. That is why it is 4 + 4 days, which is symbolic of the 44th president, Barack Obama, which is the truth as to who and what is behind this development, with Saudi Arabia officially discontinuing the talks to normalization with Israel. Okay? And when the prediction comes to pass, which is the bomb explosion and evacuation in New York City 4 + 4 days later, it will prove everything that I am saying here. And that is the purpose for this prediction that is from God. Make no mistake. All right, now let's get into some of the really, truly profound things here. And we'll start with this profound connection right here. But this trail of signs is explained much better in the absolute must-watch Bible Prophecy Predicts Israel will bomb Iran on October 9th. Okay, that is one of the most important videos on this channel by far. So make sure you watch that other video. I'm giving you the heads up here. It is an absolute must-watch. It is the central... It's an explanation, among other things, of the central prophecy in the Bible and God's prophetic signs that support all of what I'm saying. So I can't describe it. You need to watch that video, okay? But the first connection we have here is an exact 4 months, and this confirms the 4 + 4 days. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, and that's what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. So he pairs these numbers together to confirm the signs. And if we think about it, that would be the easiest simple way of, or one simple way of providing second witnesses is through pairing certain numbers together. And God's prophetic signs, and this is something that almost no one appreciates, is that they cannot be properly understood. Their full intended meaning cannot be properly understood without their connections to the other prophetic signs. It is through the connections to the other prophetic signs that we are informed about the significance and information regarding the prophetic sign. They are not prophetic signs in isolation of each other. Likewise, neither is the Bible. It is an interconnected document. It isn't a linear document, and passages cannot be isolated as proof texts, as many, especially evangelicals, use them as. They will isolate a passage as a proof text for developing a particular theological bent or doctrine. But anyway, this is the reality of God's big picture of signs, is that they cannot be understood without their connections to the other signs, and nowhere are the connections being explained in God's big picture like they are on this channel. So the 4 months confirms the 4 + 4 days, and exactly 4 months earlier, we have this major Israel prophetic sign, which was the day that thousands of Jews visited Joseph's tomb in the West Bank for the first time since Joseph's tomb had been vandalized by Palestinians, by Arab Muslims, a year earlier on April 9th, 2022. To visit the tomb, which is why it hadn't been visited in over a year, requires an escort by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, into the West Bank. because of the hatred of the Jews. The hatred by Arabs of the Jews, by Muslims, of the Jews. Because there are Christian Muslims that don't hate Jews. Christian Arabs that don't hate Jews like Muslim Arabs do. And so we have, and furthermore, Jewish Arabs are Jews. There are many. Well, anyway, so this was a major development. It was a major sign. It was anticipated in advance because it was known that there would be a major Israel sign in advance because of this 70 months connection, which I'll explain. But speaking of which, what confirms this is the 700,000 images that were released on this date of the Titanic, the new images that procured for the first time ever a very impressive 3D imagery of the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean. And this was the development on this date. And this was also the day of the news, a report, but it wasn't published on this date. So it's arguably, I'm torn as to whether it is, but it does relate. So that's the other thing. But the media started reporting on it anyway on this day, which was the scientific report about how Manhattan was sinking. That ties to the Titanic, and it ties to the predicted dirty bomb in Manhattan 4 months and then 4 plus 4 days later. Okay, so the Titanic sinking was a judgment warning from God. The unsinkable ship sank on its maiden voyage. It was symbolic of man's hubris. And much is said about the Titanic sign in other videos. But the point is that it was 700,000 images that made the new 3D imagery. And that confirms the 70 months. And again, that's how God's signs works. The second and third witnesses that confirm a matter. This was the very, very prophetic date, extremely prophetic date. In fact, couldn't be more important. This was the day that Jews were able to openly pray on the Temple Mount for the first time in 19 centuries. Because the Jews don't, although it's in Jerusalem, control the Temple Mount. In the name of peace, they gave it to the Jordanians after it was captured in 1967. And so the Jews, if they are on the Temple Mount, they are not even allowed to say a prayer before drinking a sip of water. But this day, there was nothing to inhibit them from doing so, because Jews were openly walking around the Temple Mount freely. There were no Arabs up there, because this was just a few days after the Arab terrorism on the Temple Mount, which came after days of climaxing protests by Arabs. That was on July 14th. And so this was a very prophetic date. It was exactly 7 times 7 biblical years, prophetic years, which is made up of 12 months of 30 days each. Okay? And in the Bible and in God's signs, God frequently uses a symbolic 3 sets of 7, but it is more than that. It is a 7 followed by a 7 times 7, in fact. And this is also the Omer count between Passover and Pentecost. The first symbolic 7 days gets us to first of feast fruits, and then it is 7 times 7 days to Pentecost. And also in the book of Joshua, when the Israelites took the promised land, and this is very important and relevant to what we're talking about here, the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7. They marched around the walls of security of Jericho once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. A 7 followed by a 7 times 7. And that's what we have here. We have this exact 7 times 7 biblical years followed by exactly 70 months. Okay? Now, there's way more to this, which is explained in the Bible Prophecy Predicts Israel Will Bomb Iran on October 9th video. But this is a parallel, this trail right here, is a parallel with the most central prophecy in the Bible, which is the 70 weeks prophecy. And the 70th week of the 70 weeks, it's broken into a period of 69 sevens, and then a final set of 7 in the 70th week of the 70th weeks. Now the word week is translated from the Hebrew word Shabua, which simply means a unit of 7. And in the prophecy, it refers to a period of 7 years. And this final set of symbolic 7 years is in this prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 is symbolic of the end times period and the Antichrist period, which we are already well inside. And this was one of a number of symbolic beginnings of the final set of 7 years. There were other ones as well in late 2017 and early 2018 that demonstrated that that was a symbolic beginning of the final set of 7 years. And the prediction being made in this video will prove this. There are no doubt, because no one knows this yet, but people will know after the prediction, and the word get out's about the prediction being made. And therefore, through the prediction, God will inform Christians that are interested in prophecy that they are in fact incorrect in assuming that the final 7 years has not started. It has started, and the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this. That is the purpose of the prediction. Make no mistake. We are already well inside the final 7 years, and the debate is over. Case closed. End of controversy. No more speculating about when a supposed final 7 years is about to begin, which is divided into 2 sets of 1,260 days. It's already started. That is the purpose of this prediction from God. Case closed. Now, this 70th month hints at the 70th week. Now, why is that the case? Because this is the 69 times 7 years that's paralleling the prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. In the prophecy, it begins with a decree to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, which Nehemiah, the decree from Artaxerxes in Nehemiah chapter 2, fulfilled. And from that is exactly 69 times 7 years, biblical years, which is 173,880 days. And if we add that to the date that the Royal British Observatory says or confirms is the date of the decree, which was March 14th, 445 BC, we get April 8th, 32 AD, which according to the Royal British Observatory was the Sunday before the Passover in 32 AD. And the Sunday before Passover is known in Christianity as Palm Sunday, the day that Jesus officially arrived into Jerusalem on the donkey. Okay? So Gabriel gave Daniel in the prophecy a period of 173,880 days, beginning from the decree to rebuild the walls, which gets us to April 8th, 32 AD, the Sunday before the Passover, the full moon Passover, because the Royal British Observatory knows when the full moons were, because they're like clockwork, Kepler's math. They know exactly when it was to the second. And the date that gets us April 8th is the Sunday before, okay, which is known as Palm Sunday, because Jesus was crucified on the Passover, but he officially arrived on the Sunday before. Now, in Luke chapter 3, it says that Jesus began his ministry of teaching and healing people in the 15th year of the Emperor Tiberius, and the Emperor Tiberius became the emperor in 14 AD. So 14 plus 15 equals 29 AD. And in the Gospel of John, it is recorded that during his ministry of teaching and healing people, he observed 4 Passovers and was crucified on the 4th one. So 29, 30, 31, 32. Jesus was crucified on the Passover in 32 AD. By the way, that's a fact. That's not a speculation. It's possible to know. Mathematically, as I just said, from the prophecy, another way to know that too is that, long story, it's required that there be 5,888 moons in the prophecy, which requires that the year of Jesus' crucifixion necessitated an extra month of Adar. And the year 30, 31, and 33, and probably 34 as well, do not have an extra month of Adar. Only the year 32 AD does. Okay? And that's another thing, that's another proof. But besides that, the Royal British Observatory confirms everything as well. So Jesus was crucified in 32 AD, and anyone that tells you otherwise it's an indicator that they haven't studied. They talk like they know Bible prophecy, but this is the most basic thing. And if they had studied a little bit, they would know that Jesus was crucified in 32 AD. That's just my opinion. It's not necessarily true that they don't know much about Bible prophecy, but it is an indicator that they don't know much about Bible prophecy. But at the same time claim to. So, anyway, this is a parallel here with this prophecy. So, exactly 7 times 7 years back was the decree in the Israeli Knesset to rebuild Jerusalem. And that was on April 1st, 1969. And that followed 69 times 7 years to 1535 and Suleiman the Magnificent's decree, the Ottoman Empire Sultan, who decreed that the walls of Jerusalem be rebuilt, just like was decreed by Artaxerxes, the Persian king. So we have this amazing parallel with the most central prophecy in the Bible. And that's the reason for the 70 exact months here. Okay, and what I'm saying is that makes all of this relevant here. This is an Israel, anti-Israel, antichrist sign here, which, as I am saying, is instigated by the Antichrist, the 44th president, which is why it's 4 plus 4 days before the prediction of the dirty bomb in New York City, where the UN is, and Obama will lead the UN and gang up on Israel in their attempt to make Jerusalem an international city. Okay, so the Antichrist stopped peace on this day. This date also is a hint at the Antichrist, the date 9/17, because the Antichrist was the president from 2009 until 2017. And Constitution Day is September 17th every year. And the Antichrist is the unconstitutional president. He wasn't born in America. And also, he will become the president again through twisting the Constitution, allowing him to overcome the 22nd Amendment. Okay? So, now I'm going to demonstrate a bunch of more fours to confirm for you even more that this is what I'm talking about, that this sign right here is an Obama sign, and that Obama was behind this move by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia didn't do this. They were coerced somehow. Somehow the U.S. twisted Saudi Arabia's arm into doing this official statement and discontinuing peace talks, or the normalization process. In other words, peace. It is America that is behind there being no peace at this point. Okay? And that's because of the Antichrist. Now, that's why this date here is exactly 4 plus 4 months after this date, which was the first day that this comet, this very prophetic comet, was visible to the naked eye as it was entering the dragon constellation, Draco. And the dragon in Bible prophecy is symbolic of the Antichrist in Revelation chapter 12. And furthermore, that dragon in Revelation chapter 12 persecutes the Jews in Judea, which is exactly what I'm saying will be the case, which is why God designed this sign here on this date. Not only did this sign happen, but it happened on the date 9/17, which is an Obama date, as I just explained. It's Constitution Day. Obama, by the way, was born exactly 9 years, and the number 9 is the most important number in God's big picture of signs. As from the Bible, it symbolizes God's judgment, and God's signs is only explained on this channel. God's true big picture of signs, I should say. I don't want to make it seem like the only place to get Bible prophecy information. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that his big picture of signs is only being explained on this channel. Now, but I am also saying that God's signs cannot be fully understood without their connections. But so anyway, this comet is very prophetic. This is the Antichrist's wife's birthday, which is actually relevant. But I explained the comet E3 signs in another video. But the point is that in Genesis 1:14, God says that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs, and this was a light in the sky that first became visible on this date. And this sign was all about the tail of the comet, because on this date as well, no, I think it might have been a few days later, another prophetic sign. But the comet was about the separation of the tail, the comet from the comet of the tail from the comet. There was a solar storm, a solar wind that temporarily disconnected, if you will, the tail of the comet from the comet body. And the red dragon in the Bible prophecy is all about its tail, the tail that sweeps the 1/3 of the stars down to Earth, which is symbolic of, because in the chapter prophecy, the dragon and his angels are thrown down from heaven to earth. But prior to that, in the preceding verses, the dragon sweeps his tail and 1/3 of the stars fall to earth. And this is symbolism for Satan and his angels being thrown down from heaven to earth, manifested as the Antichrist. And that's why also, for example, this date here was exactly 4 months and 4 days, which is another hint at the 44th president, after the day that Ken Starr died. The lawyer Ken Starr, who is famous for investigating the 42nd president, which led to his impeachment. The 42nd president and Ken Starr hints at the Antichrist, because in Revelation chapter 12, the dragon is said to rule for 42 months. And so that's why Ken Starr connects with this star sign, which is about the Revelation chapter 12, which is a Revelation chapter 12 dragon sign. And that dragon rules for 42 months. Hence Ken Starr, in his connection, he's known for his role in investigating the 42nd president, as we all know. So that's astounding right there. Okay, but the point is these fours connect with this date, which, as I'm saying, proves that Obama, the 44th president, is behind this, because Obama is calling the shots behind Biden. And this is in turn another 4 + 4 days to the predicted dirty bomb or suitcase nuke in New York City. All right, so now some more fours maybe first. Let's go here first. Well, here's some fours here actually. So this date here is exactly 252 weeks, which is astounding because this hints at 2,520, which is the number of days in 7 biblical years, which is the 70th 7 in the Bible prophecy. So we have this symbolic 70th 7 here, and we have also this 70th 7 here, with this exact 252 weeks, which hints at 2,520 days. Okay, now this date here is also an Obama date, November 17th, 2018. 11/17 hints at Obama. Obama released his long-anticipated prophetic A Promised Land book on the date 11/17, and that is also because the Antichrist is described in Leviticus chapter 11, Zechariah chapter 11, verse 17, when God describes the Antichrist as his worthless servant. And also, the first mention of the word owl in the Bible is in Leviticus 11:17, and Obama is known for being a night owl. He was known while in the White House by the media as being a night owl. He would begin his press conferences late, and this was in stark contrast, which was designed by God, with his predecessor, who was known for being an early bird. Okay? And of course, that's more Antichrist symbolism because he is a creature of the night, Obama. Okay, a night owl. Leviticus 11:17. But also, the 1117th word in Strong's Hebrew Old Testament Concordance is the word for high place, which is Bama. The Hebrew word Bama means high place, which is in the Bible a metaphor for heaven, and also a euphemism for the false religious worship that the Jews would conduct on the tops of mountains, the high places. That's what Bama means in Hebrew. And Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And so in Hebrew, Barak means lightning, and in the language Jesus would have spoken, Aramaic, the word O means from. So Barack Obama means lightning from high place, which is a metaphor for heaven, which is what Jesus said. He saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. So either Jesus was identifying the Antichrist, either Jesus didn't know what he was saying, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and said it anyway, knowing that it would confuse us, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any sense. Okay, now, this date here was very prophetic, but let's begin with the fours, because we're talking about the fours here. Again, from this date is 4 plus 4 days, and then we have this prophetic Antichrist connection, because again, the 70th seven is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist in the prophecy, and this 252 weeks hints at that, as I explained. This gets us back to this date when the news broke that they discovered the submarine of the missing Argentine submarine that had 44 sailors. In Argentina, in Argentina, the story is colloquially known as the 44 sailors. The media, the Argentines simply call the news story the 44 sailors. Okay? And that's because it hints at the 44th president. But this submarine was lost after it lost contact. It was a mystery as to where it went, and many nations around the world participated in a global international effort to search for the sub, and it was discovered almost 1 day extra from an exact year after it sank. But anyway, the story about this submarine is relevant here because the story is how, at the time that it sank, an explosion was detected by the international, I forget the organization's acronym and the name of it, but it's the international organization that is responsible for detecting underwater nuclear explosions around the world. So it detected this explosion and pinpointed where they thought the explosion was, and therefore where the submarine sank. But so anyway, that's an explosion sign, and it's connecting, as I'm saying, to this predicted explosion, this is why this is extremely profound. So from the 44 sailors sign, which is all about the explosion, it is exactly 252 weeks, which is symbolic of the end times period of the Antichrist, the 44th president, to this prophetic sign on this date, which, as I am saying, is indicating and pointing to the 44th president Antichrist. And then it is just simply another 44 plus 4 days to the predicted explosion in Manhattan. All right, so it's just 2 steps from this explosion sign. And this was expected in advance, a prophetic sign on this date. Because it was known ahead of time, because it was in the Hebrew calendar, the date 9/9 in 5779. And the number 9, as I'm saying in God's signs, is symbolic of judgment, as it is from the Bible. And so that's why, one reason, it was also 9 days after the paradise fire on November 8th. And so when the paradise fire, but I knew before the paradise fire that, I also predicted the paradise fire, because I knew that on November 8th there would be a sign 9 days before 9/9/5779. I knew that there would be some sort of judgment sign, because the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. And the judgment sign we received was the apocalyptic evacuation. Because that's what's predicted to happen. There'll be an evacuation. So this evacuation sign connects with the 44 sailors sign, which is an explosion sign. And I didn't even realize that until now. So the reason for the 9 days in between, because, one reason, because it's an interconnected web and there's more reasons for why they're separated by 9 days. But the paradise fire, 9 days before 9/9/5779, is an evacuation sign. The apocalyptic evacuation of Paradise, California. And it killed many people. The deadliest fire until, in modern times, forest fire before the Maui fire, which is also an Obama sign, which is explained in the other video, the Maui fire video, which is an amazing video. Make sure you watch it. And so anyway, this connects with the explosion sign. And so these two together combine to connect to the predicted explosion and evacuation from Manhattan. Okay, so 9 days before 9/9/5779 was the Paradise Fire evacuation. And then on the date 9/9/5779 was the 9 UN resolutions against Israel. And what made it unique, among other things, is that it was the first time that the U.S. Voted no against the resolution on the Golan Heights, in effect making it official U.S. recognition that the Golan Heights, captured in the Yom Kippur War for the purpose of Israel protecting itself, because prior to then, it was easy for the Syrians to launch rockets down at Israel from the heights. So out of necessity, during the Yom Kippur War with Syria, they annexed the Golan Heights. And anyway, this is the first time that the U.S. voted no on that resolution to condemn Israel on the Golan Heights instead of abstaining. And so that was an amazing event in Israel history too, but it was a prophetic sign, and it involves Israel. And what I'm saying is that this connects through this prophetic sign involving Israel, for which America will be condemned and judged with the dirty bomb explosion. Right? This is in a sense the opposite support of Israel. This is anti-Israel action on the part of the U.S., and this is pro-Israel action on the part of the U.S. And it all hints at Obama, because again, this date hints at Obama and the 44 sailors. So it all connects to Obama. It is all pointing to Obama, who will lead America and the world in its effort to make Jerusalem an international city. Because Obama, just like the Arab Muslims, hates Israel. That's the truth. Obama is a Marxist. And Marxism and Islam are like two pincers of hate, pushing Israel towards restoration. Because Israel keeps being forced into restoration. And the final step for Israel's restoration is restoration of the Temple Mount, which it will be forced into doing through its fight with Iran and Syria in the coming days. Just like it was forced to take the West Bank and expand and take East Jerusalem with the 6-Day War. It was a preemptive war that it was forced to do because of the hate of the Arabs. They were about to gang up on Israel and try to destroy it in 1967. And as a result, Israel was forced to take more ground. It took more territory, which gave it more of a security buffer zone between it and its neighbors. And in the process, it took the ancient capital, Jerusalem, but it didn't take the Temple Mount. So it's like 3 steps. Israel was forced to become a nation out of necessity due to Arab-Muslim hatred in 1948. And then again, another step, where it was forced, and it was also forced by Israel, by the world, by the hatred of the Jews manifested through the Nazis, to emigrate back to Israel in the first place. And throughout the decades, the Soviets were in league with the Muslims, like 2 pincers forcing Jews to return to Israel from around the world, from the communist and Islamic countries. And so, okay, you get the point. There are 2 forces of evil, but they're 2 sides of the same coin, Islam and Marxism. And so we have the Marxists in America. It's a true conspiracy. There is a conspiracy, and it's true. Communism has always been a conspiracy. That's how it works. It is a conspiracy trying to overthrow things, and communism didn't die. It just evolved into different new forms of it. And okay, so this 44 sailors sign was exactly 44 weeks after the false missile alert in Hawaii, which was also about an evacuation, on the same day that there was an evacuation in Japan due to another false missile alert. I think it was the same day, or it might have been the day after, or something to that effect. But it could be wrong. It could have been the same day. But the point is the Antichrist is from Hawaii, the 44th president, and there was this potential explosion sign, but it was the false missile alert. The alert didn't get called off for, I think, almost a half hour, causing panic across Hawaii. All right, and it was exactly 44 weeks, because the 44th president is from Hawaii, to the 44 sailors sign, which in turn connects with the symbolic 70th 7 period, to the Obama sign, which will confirm it after 4 plus 4 days, when the explosion occurs in America, which is a sign warned of with the Hawaii false missile alert. This date, this 99577 date, on the day of 9 UN resolutions and Trump voting no on the resolution, was the same day that Trump was in Paradise, California, visiting the ruins of the Paradise Fire 9 days after the fire, which confirms the 9-day interval that I was talking about, because Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to trumpet his prophetic signs, trumpet and highlight his prophetic signs. And okay, in archaic English, the word trump means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. And this date was exactly 666 days after the last day that Obama was in the White House, the Antichrist, the day of Trump's inauguration at noon. Up until noon on this day, Obama was the president. 666 days later, we have the horrific sign involving the Paradise Fire. The first judgment came out of the fall from paradise. The second judgment was by water, but as Peter said, the following judgment will be symbolized by fire instead of water. Jesus' official arrival into Jerusalem and first coming was on the 10th day of the first month in the Hebrew calendar. This is 110, and this hints at the number 110. In the book of Joshua, the date on which the Hebrews crossed over the Jordan River and officially entered the Promised Land was also on the 10th day of the first month, which is 110 and hints at the number 110. Jesus' first coming is symbolized by the number 110. This is why on 9/11, the 2 towers that collapsed were each 110 stories high. The collapse of 2 towers that were 110 floors was symbolism for Jesus' second coming. In the book of Joshua in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110. Joshua led the Hebrews around the security walls of the ancient city of Jericho before they collapsed in judgment. On 9/11, the Twin Towers, which were 110 stories high, collapsed, engendering a small earthquake that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall, where George Washington was inaugurated, on Wall Street. President George Washington was a founding father, and his inauguration as the first president was a symbolic founding of the nation. The cracking of the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street on 9/11 symbolized America's foundation in God being cracked. This is because after Washington's inauguration at Federal Hall, he then walked down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel, where he consecrated the nation to God, saying that if the nation were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its blessings. After 9/11, Trinity Chapel was called the Miracle Chapel, as it was the only building at Ground Zero to have survived. It did not even suffer a broken window due to the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted as it sheltered the chapel from the falling debris. In commemoration of this sycamore tree outside the chapel, today there is a huge bronze statue of its roots. In other words, through the 9/11 events, God was pointing to Trinity Chapel and Washington's covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. Wall Street is named after the original 9-foot-high wall of security that the Dutch built to keep the British and the Indians out. The collapse of 110 floors that cracked the foundation of Federal Hall on Wall Street, which is named after a 9-foot-high security wall, hints at 9/11 and points to Joshua, who died at 110, and the Hebrews that marched around the walls of security before they collapsed in judgment. 110 floors and the 9-foot-high wall of security that was Wall Street points to George Washington's march down Wall Street to Trinity Chapel that symbolized a covenantal relationship between America and God. To this effect, Washington's march down Wall Street with the New York Stock Exchange, the building that symbolizes America's financial strength, located on one side of the street, and Federal Hall, the building that symbolizes America's governmental and institutional strength on the other side, also pointed to the cutting rights ritual practiced in ancient Israel that was used in Abraham's and God's ritual walk in their covenant that is described in Genesis 15. A covenant that symbolizes Washington's walk down Wall Street and his covenantal consecration of the nation to God at Trinity Chapel. There are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded not on ethnicity or territory or language, but were founded solely for God: Israel and America. In every daily Bible that is divided into 365 readings, a portion of the Bible for each day of the year, on every September 11th, everyone that reads this standard 365-day Bible reads the passage in the book of Isaiah, chapter 9, verse 11, which is the judgment warning on ancient Israel, which was a raid on ancient Israel by the world's first recorded terrorists, the ancient Assyrians. And the terrorists on 9/11 were from the same part of the world. The Assyrians raided the northern kingdom of Israel first, and then later the southern kingdom of Judah was destroyed, which is why the terrorists on 9/11 hit the North Tower first, followed 17 minutes later by the South Tower. And this Isaiah 9:11 passage includes a mention of collapsed buildings and uprooted sycamore trees. On the morning after 9/11, Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle gave a speech to the world regarding the events on 9/11. He quoted the passage in Isaiah 9:11, not realizing it was a judgment warning on the ancient Jews. He quoted how, after the raid by the Assyrians, the Hebrews did not repent to God, but instead vowed defiantly to rebuild and become stronger than before. And so, like the ancient Jews, America did not repent after the judgment warning, and instead defied God even more. And so, like ancient Israel, America will now be destroyed. This is why, in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, he frequently pairs together the number 110 and the number 9. Both of these numbers symbolize God's judgment on the nation, and paired together, these numbers point to the big judgment warning that was 9/11. As well, these numbers paired together in God's signs and connections serve as a witness confirmation that the perceived signs and connections are from God. After the judgment warning of 9/11, America was given a period of grace to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment destruction. In the Bible, a 20-year period symbolizes a complete period of waiting. Jacob waited 20 years to get possession of his wives and property. The children of Israel waited 20 years to be freed of Jabin, the king of Canaan, when they were freed from bondage by Deborah and Barak. The Ark of the Covenant waited 20 years in Kiriath Jearim, and Solomon spent 20 years building his home and the house of God. On the 20th anniversary of the buildings that collapsed on 9/11 was the sudden collapse of America's presence in Afghanistan, and the iconic scene of this was the U.S. Air Force plane leaving the airport in Afghanistan, and the big number on the side of its plane is 1109, which hints at 110 and 9. All right, now, so a 110, now, the thing is that this date was anticipated in advance. It was known since the summer of 2019. One reason being the 44 weeks connection. But this is Pentecost, and in 2019, and the Pentecost in 2019 and Pentecost in 2018, God demonstrated a stunning parallel of signs with the timing of events in the book of Joshua, which were essentially a countdown to the symbolic day that the walls of security collapsed on Jericho in the Bible on Pentecost. And the signs and the trail of signs in these two trails of signs to Pentecost confirm that a correct reading of it, in fact, in the Bible, makes it that the walls of security collapsed on Pentecost. But God proved it regardless. And so before June 16th, 2019, I was anticipating for it to be a very prophetic date, because it was 100. Okay, so Joshua died at the age of 110, and this Pentecost, as I'm saying, was at the end of a trail of signs that was demonstrated to be a parallel of signs with the timing of events in the book of Joshua. And what was known ahead of time also is that this Pentecost was 110 days after the security wall collapsed in Jerusalem due to heavy rains, an act of God. This was exactly 110 weeks after the tunnel walls collapsed, because in the book of Joshua, the walls of security collapsed on Jericho. And so it was 110 weeks after the tunnel walls collapsed on the rail cars carrying plutonium in the Hanford nuclear site, the historic site that produced the plutonium for the first nuclear bombs. And that caused a complete evacuation of the Hanford nuclear site. And come to think of it, that means that therefore this 110 weeks connection connects with this Pentecost, which, as I'm saying, connects with this prophetic trail of signs to the predicted nuclear explosion on September 25th, 2023. Wow. I didn't anticipate that. That's another amazing, profound connection here. Just amazing. Now, also this Pentecost was 110 months after the 100-foot wall collapsed at Mount Vernon High School. And that it was a hint at how the 100 section of Washington's wall collapsed at Washington's Mount Vernon estate. Exactly 191 months after 9/11 and 191 hints at 9/11. Okay, so on and on. It's a big picture of signs. It's infinite. And when you try to explain one part of the web, you end up pulling the entire web, which is why it's extremely difficult to explain. Okay, so as I was saying, back to what I was saying now, this Pentecost was known ahead of time because of the 110 connections. And that's why on this Pentecost, we have the 110,000 deaths. Oh, and the big sign, which upon learning caused me to need to take a long walk, was the rare earthquake in Jericho, Washington State, just a few miles downriver from the Hanford nuclear site. And the walls of security collapsed on Jericho due to an earthquake, and archaeology proves that. And so we had the rare 3.2 earthquake at Jericho, Washington State, at the end of the 110 connections on Pentecost. So that was just, when I learned that, I was like, I got to go for a walk. So, all right, now, the reason for also explaining all of this is because there was another demonstration of the timing of events leading to a symbolic walls of security collapsing on Jericho on this Pentecost in 2020, because on this day there was 110,000 deaths and Joshua died at the age of 110. And as I explained, God pairs 9 and 110 together. And in the account of in Joshua, when the walls of security collapsed on Jericho, the Israelites enacted a symbolic 3 sets of 7. And that's why 3 times 7 days, 3 sets of 7 days back, was the official date of 90,000 deaths. In the account, the Israelites marched around once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, they marched 7 times while 7 trumpets were blown. Okay? Okay, and they marched. And that's why on this day it was the march. So it was news. This was at the height of the Black Lives Matter Antichrist protests. And one story on this date was the football team for the Atlanta football team, the Atlanta Falcons. And it wasn't any other football team, but the Atlanta Falcons were participating in the march on this Pentecost on Sunday, June 7th, 2020. And this is relevant, as I'll explain in a second. But let me just continue with this. But it was a march, and the Hebrews marched around the walls of security. So 3 sets of 7 days back from the 110,000 and Joshua died at 110 was the 90,000 deaths, and God pairs 9 and 110 together. Okay? And furthermore, it has to do with Joshua, for why God pairs 9 and 110, as I explained just a minute ago. But also what confirms this is that this date was the same day as the 9th episode was released. So this was during the height of the CVD lockdown. And the biggest news event was, in fact, the docu-series release of the Michael Jordan Last Dance series. And the 9th of the 10 episodes regarded the flu game. But the 9th episode was released on the same day of the 90,000 deaths. And the 9th episode was about the flu game in the NBA Finals, in which Michael Jordan played while having the flu, which hinted at the CVD disease, right? And the 90,000 deaths. But also, in the docu-series, Michael Jordan said that he couldn't breathe. And 3 sets of 7 days later was the I Can't Breathe protest with the Atlanta Falcons marching in the I Can't Breathe protests, because the protesters were protesting how George Floyd couldn't breathe. So that's astounding, right? Now, also, this was the day of the Maria Bartiromo interview with Trump. And in the interview, Trump mentioned his border wall of security 3 times. And Trump's presidency was synonymous with his border wall of security, as was his election campaign, because before the walls of security of Jericho collapsed, the walls collapsed after the trumpets were blown. And so I'm just going to take just a minute here to explain the prophetic relevance of Trump and his border wall of security. President Trump is God's trumpet that he uses to highlight and confirm his signs. The word trump in archaic English means trumpet or the sounding of a trumpet. Donald Trump was born on a Sabbath day, and the portion of Torah that was read in synagogues on the day that Trump was born was the passage from the book of Numbers, in which God commanded the making of trumpets. Trump was born exactly 23 months, which happens to be exactly 700 days, before Israel was reborn. And God used Trump in prophetic signs regarding the restoration of Israel. Donald Trump chose his running mate, Mike Pence, and their two names, Trump-Pence, hints at trumpets. Trump's presidency, including his election campaign, was synonymous with his border wall of security. Before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment on ancient Jericho, the Hebrews blew trumpets. Before the walls of security collapsed in God's judgment on the ancient city of Jericho, the Hebrews marched around Jericho's walls of security 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. This was a 3 sets of 7. In the book of Revelation, which describes God's judgment in the end times period, there are also 3 sets of 7 judgments. When the Hebrews blew the trumpets at Jericho, it was an announcement from God of judgment on the city of Jericho. Likewise, President Trump's presidency was an announcement of judgment on the nation of America, God's Gentile nation and the only other nation in history besides Israel that was founded on a relationship with God. This is why President Trump's election campaign and presidency were synonymous with his border wall of security, and why on the first day of his presidency, on Inauguration Day, President Trump was exactly 70 years, 7 months, and 7 days old, which was 3 sets of 7 and paralleled the 3 sets of 7 in the book of Joshua. Through the symbolic very beginning of Trump's presidency, God announced judgment on the nation. Joshua, the leader of the Hebrews, led them around the walls of security 7 times over 7 days, while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets. On the day that President Trump was elected by 77 electoral votes, the leader of Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, had been in power for exactly 7 years, 7 months, and 7 days. All right. Now, also, there was I think the interview was 1 hour and 10 minutes, but there was a 1:10 in it. I know that. It's been a while, though, so I can't recall exactly. But either way, we're getting the point here. Trump is about his border wall of security, and that's why Trump mentioned his border wall of security 3 times in this interview. And this was the day of another prophetic sign regarding the border wall of security, and I forget the details of that too. But anyway, it was 110 days, which is, again, a hint at Joshua, who died at the age of 110, after Trump's peace plan was released regarding Israel and the Palestinian issue on January 28th, 2020. And the day after, a big news story was how a section of Trump's border wall of security collapsed. That's right. His border wall of security collapsed due to high winds, an act of God. The winds collapsed a section of Trump's border wall of security that was being constructed. And the news harped on that, any chance to criticize Trump and especially his border wall of security. But that was a news story on that at this time. And it was 110 days inclusive count. But it was the day after the release of the peace plan regarding Israel, which is wall symbolism, if you think about it, because it's this division of God's land, which is the biggest transgression in Bible prophecy. And so Trump trumpeted, in a sense, this peace plan that would have, although the Jews were getting more than they would have gotten in prior peace plan proposals, regardless, it was still something that's not to be done, and it's this division of God's land. And that's why 110 days, and Trump was in the news for his interview where he mentioned his border wall and the 90,000 deaths and the 9th episode, which connects with 3 sets of 7, more Trump symbolism, to the 110,000 deaths. Joshua died at 110, and the march of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, why the Atlanta Falcons is relevant is because Atlanta, the name is named after Atlantis. The Atlantic Ocean, also for that matter, is named after this mythological Atlantis, which is symbolic of transhumanism and essentially is a form of a Tower of Babel story in the Bible, where man reaches a technological utopia without God, right? And God destroyed the Tower of Babel, if you don't know the story. So, for man's hubris, which is contained in the Titanic sinking sign, for that matter. So that's the significance of Atlanta. This is also home to the you-know-what quasi-military department that promotes the CVD thing. You know, the thing that is the mark of the Antichrist. It's headquartered in Atlanta, right? So that's the symbolism here. And furthermore, it's this Pentecost date and the 50 miles per hour crystal ball sign that was blown up against the church. That's because the thing that you can't talk about, is the mark of the Antichrist, designed to test the fate of quote-unquote Christians. Now, I do realize that many, perhaps the majority of quote-unquote Christians, have already taken the mark of the Antichrist, the spiritual abomination. That doesn't change the fact that it is the mark of the Antichrist. It is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. It does not need an additional something, a technology to go with it, nor does it require some sort of false religious form of worship to go with it, and nor does it require a supposed dispensation age after the supposed all Christians will be raptured moment in history. And the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove this. Make no mistake. Please understand, I know far better than you why God has given me a voice through this prediction. It is to prove that the thing is the mark of the Antichrist. Case closed. End of debate. And there would be no purpose for this prediction were it not for the purpose of ending the discussion about whether it is or isn't the mark of the Antichrist. It is. Now, nowhere in the Bible does it say that you can't repent. One can beg for mercy. But you have, if you've taken it, you've taken the mark of the Antichrist, which the Bible says if you do, you will go to hell. It is a spiritual abomination. It's the reason, it's parallel with the reason for the flood judgment that wiped out the world's population as well, right? In the story. When the line was corrupted. You know what I mean by a line. Because the thing changes the line. It changes chromosomes. one reason why it's a spiritual abomination. The other reason is that it uses certain things, tissue, from you know what, from unborn, right? Okay, so and furthermore, there's no excuse for not knowing that. Had you been engaged in the spiritual battle that we are in, you would have understood how dark the times were, and to not be trusting authorities, etc., and the spirit of Antichrist. And the prophet Hosea said, my people reject knowledge, and because they reject knowledge, I reject them from being my priest. My people perish because they reject knowledge. But the reason why you didn't know is because in general, the typical quote-unquote Christian was living a worldly life barely indistinguishable from a non-believer. They certainly were not expecting the Lord to return soon because they weren't following Bible prophecy, even though 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy. And the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, Revelation 19:10. But furthermore, they were living worldly lives. They weren't engaged in the war that we are in. And so that's why they were deceived in general. And again, the whole purpose of the Antichrist and the mark of the Antichrist is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians. So if it were broadcast loud and clear to everyone, there wouldn't be much of a test. You have to spiritually discern, and that comes through being involved. So, and so anyway, the commonly held objections, by the way, are that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy. I answer in the snake bite video. Okay, I can't go through the commonly held objections every single video. Now, so that's Atlanta. That's the purpose of the Atlanta March sign on this prophetic date, speaking of which, of CVD, which is the 110,000 deaths on this date, which ties into the sign that was blown up against the church, the evangelical church in Columbia, Florida, due to a tornado spawned by Cristobal, the crossover storm. Okay, if this isn't clearly a judgment sign against the church for you, then I don't know what is. Okay? And like I'm saying, the main theme of God's signs is judgment warning for the church. Now, the reason this is astounding, one of my favorite connections, is that this Atlanta March sign, which was known in advance, and I knew that this connection in advance also, which made it even more astounding when it happened, when I learned about the Atlanta March, is that it is exactly 328 years after the real-life Atlantis. And again, I knew of this connection before the Atlanta March story. The Atlanta Falcons were involved in the biggest comeback Super Bowl, which was the 3-28 Super Bowl. It's known as the 3-28 Super Bowl because at one point the Patriots were down 3-28 against the Atlanta Falcons. And the Atlanta Falcons blew it. And the Patriots won that Super Bowl. They ended up coming back to tie 28-28 and then winning in overtime. An amazing Super Bowl. And the biggest sports team in God's signs is the New England Patriots, as it symbolizes America and the spiritual founding of America. But anyway, that was the 3-28. That's what the Atlanta Falcons are known for. And they haven't been in a Super Bowl since, and I don't even know when they were in a Super Bowl before that, if they were even in a Super Bowl before that. So, the Atlanta Falcons are known for the 3-28 Super Bowl. That's it's a long story short. And the name of the coach that, had to take blame for blowing the Super Bowl, his name was Dan Quinn. Now, Dan hints at Daniel in the Bible, and the verse in the Old Testament that symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist taking the thing is Daniel 3:28. And that's why we have the 328 years connection. And that's why the 328 Super Bowl, for that matter, involving Atlanta, which is the headquarters of the organization that promotes the thing. Okay? Now, the real life Atlantis was exactly 328 years earlier. And this was the tsunami caused by the 7.7 earthquake at Port Royal, Jamaica, which at the time was the biggest economic center in the Americas. And also a place where pirates hung out. Port Royal, Jamaica. Okay? As a result of the earthquake, the land liquefied and sunk, and 2,000 people perished. The remains of Port Royal are underwater today because of the earthquake. It's a real-life Atlantis. Because the story of Atlantis is, of course, how it sank beneath the ocean. It's amazing what God did here. Now, at the time, the preachers in New England were saying that this was a judgment warning, which it was. Cotton Mather, for example, said so. And, okay, now, one thing about it, too, is that there was a landslide from Judgment Hill. In fact, the majority, from what I recall, the majority of people, I think, died in the landslide. I could be wrong. No, I think I'm wrong about that. But there was a stopwatch that was found under the water. And so we know the time. It was at 7 minutes to 12, which hinted at the midnight cry, the rapture in Matthew 25. But there was a mudslide that killed many people too from what was known as Judgment Cliffs. Okay, before the tsunami, the cliffs were known as Judgment Cliffs. This making it a judgment sign. And there, many trees fell, and the logs rolled down the river, down the hillside into the city, and over the water that was now covering Port Royal. It was a huge disaster. So I think I remember enough of the details to not take a pause here and look it up. Fortunately, I remember a lot of those details because I've talked about it so many times over the years. But now I can finally bring it into a very modern, relevant video, which is this connection to the predicted judgment on America here, with the predicted dirty bomb or suitcase nuke in New York City. All right, now one more thing that I forgot here. This 50 days is confirmed because, again, God's signs works with second witnesses. This is all Antichrist symbolism, as I mentioned, as you recall. The first Antichrist blackout, 44 million, connecting to the 4 deaths of the 44th president on his birthday, and in Jakarta, where he grew up for 4 years. So anyway, this 50 days from Pentecost between these two blackouts also connects with 50 months to the day that LeBron James scored 44 points in Game 1, the symbolic Game 1 of the NBA Finals, before LeBron James finally won the finals for the Cleveland Cavaliers, which was made extremely prophetic, which is explained in other videos. I think I even explained it already when I talked about the pairing of the 9 and 23. LeBron James, Antichrist symbolism. He wore jersey 23 just like Barack Obama did. And Cleveland, okay, breaking the sports curse for Cleveland. That goes back, by the way, to the last time that a sports team in Cleveland won, which was with the Jim Brown for the Cleveland Browns. And that's because Jim Brown is pointing to the Cleveland Summit, which is also known as the Muhammad Ali Summit, which was a gathering of black athletes to discuss Muhammad Ali's decision of conscientious objection to the dictate of the state due to religious objections, which connects to this church sign and the mark of the Antichrist sign, the thing, for which the church needs to object to and refuse to follow the dictate due to conscientious objection. All right, anyway. That's why also Muhammad Ali died 1,656 days before the thing was approved. Okay, that's astounding too. Now, LeBron James, this 44-point sign. Oh, the big story was that the reason why it's the news story is that he scored 44 points. It was in fact part of the headlines because it was theorized that the opposing team let the LeBron James's team lost, even though he scored an amazing 44 points in the game. And the theory is that the defensive strategy of the other team let LeBron James score the 44 points while covering the other members of his team. And so that was the strategy, and LeBron James scoffed at the strategy, that the theory of that strategy or whatever. But anyway, the story was about his 44 points. It wasn't just that he scored 44 points. But anyway, 7 times in Bible prophecy, it is mentioned the period of the Antichrist to be 1,260 days. And exactly 1,260 days after LeBron James scored his 44 points was the day that LeBron James scored 44 points to become the 4th all-time scorer in the NBA. That's amazing, which obviously identifies the Antichrist as the 44th president, because the two 44 points games connect with 1,260 days. Now, the 1,440th word in Strong's Greek Concordance is the word 70. Also, in a day, there are 1,440 minutes, and we inherit this from ancient Babylon, which is Antichrist symbolism. 1,444 days, or 40 days exactly after the 44 points, which also hints at 144, a number from the book of Revelation, was the day of May 14th, 2019. It was Israel's 71st anniversary, the completion of their 70th anniversary year. Hence the connection that means 70. Because the Greek word 70 is the 1,440th word in the concordance. On this day, it just so happened that a heritage tree collapsed at Washington's the Washington Memorial, which made it judgment on America, because in the Bible, collapsed trees are symbolic of spiritual death of a people or nation. And that was due to unprecedented rain. It was reported on this day, May 14th, 2019, by the Washington newspaper, that Washington had experienced its wettest 365-day period in its history. And the amount of rain in that period just happened to be 71.05 inches. And this just happened to be the completion of Israel's 71st year. The year of 365 wettest rain in Washington was coinciding exactly with Israel's year, which was its 71st year. And it was 71.05 inches of rain, which made this a judgment warning for America, but also hinting at how America will be behind the effort to persecute the Jews in Judea and make Jerusalem an international city. And this, again, ties into this trail of signs that is leading to what I'm saying is that this official ending of the normalization of peace between Israel and the Arab world was instigated by the 44th president and the Marxists that have taken over the government 4 + 4 days before September 25th, 2023, the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan, or a suitcase nuke, which will be judgment, therefore, for this, for what Israel, what America, for America's role in the Palestinian so-called issue, and making it the issue, and dividing God's land. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Please leave a like and upvote the video. And once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odyssey.com channel. And do it now in case you aren't able to later.